Welcome to Film and Page. I'm Dominic, and in this video, I'm going to be talking about my top 5 books of 2022. So this was a pretty good year for books. So I read about 14 books in 2022, and there was a lot of good ones on there. A lot of really good science fiction ones, a lot that were real page turners. So this top 5 was a bit of a challenge to put together, deciding which books were going to be on the top 5 list. Now, as before, the rules I had set up for this list is I'm going to start off with number 5 and then work my way down to number 1. On top of that, I'm not including any books that was a reread. So the one book I read this year that was a reread was Cycle of the Werewolf by Stephen King. And all the books I read this year, the majority of them I reviewed on my channel with the exception of 2. And that is Star Trek New Frontier by Peter David. I didn't review that one because I just didn't. And the second one is Resident Evil Underworld by S.D. Perry. I was going to review that one, but I'm almost done that series of books, so I'm just going to hold off and then do a ranking video or review the series as a whole. Now, with that said, let's get into this list. So, on the number 5 spot is Bentley Little, Death Instinct. So this book was an absolute blast to read. I had a lot of fun reading it. It is now my favorite Bentley Little book of all time. And, I've talked about Bentley Little before on my channel. And one of the things I've always talked about is once you read a lot of his books, they kind of get repetitive, or you kind of figure out the formula to them. That's one of the drawbacks of reading a lot of his stuff. Now, he's usually very entertaining. Now, sometimes he breaks away from that formula. Sometimes it doesn't work. I've read a book where he did break from that formula and it was terrible. But this is an exception. He broke away from his formula in this book and it was amazing. It was a really fun book. It was fantastic. And what it was like a murder mystery. But not only that, it was like an 80s slasher in paperback form. And I'm a fan of 80s slashers. So this was a really, really fun book to read. And it was one of the easy choices to put on the top 5. So with that, let's move on to number 4. Red Mars by Kim Stanley Robinson. So this was a book that was recommended to me years ago by a coworker. And I picked up the trilogy. It sat on my shelf for a while, so I finally got around to reading it, and this was the last book I read in 2022, and I just got it in there. And I have to say, it was a really good book, and I just recently reviewed this one on my channel as well, and it was just a very epic, hard sci-fi story. Kim Stanley Robinson did a lot of research into this before he wrote this book about Mars and all the theories behind setting up a colony on Mars and how you would get there. So it felt really real, and there wasn't a lot of over-the-top elements into it. And it was just a really fantastic book. It was entertaining. It was long. It was over 500 pages, almost 600 pages, but it was paced in a way that it clipped along really fast, and it was a real page turner. I really couldn't put this one down. Absolutely loved it. So now let's move on to the number 3 spot. The Dark Forest by Shizhen Liu. Now this is the second book in the Three Body Problem trilogy, or the Remembrance of Earth trilogy. And it was another fantastic science fiction book like the first one. I didn't like this one quite as much as the first book. This one, it kind of dragged a little bit for the first 200 pages, and I was kind of getting worried, like, where is this going? Is this going to be any good? Or am I going to be disappointed to this book? But when it finally kicks in gear, it really kicks in gear, and it is a very fascinating book. And it's like the first one, really crazy science fiction concepts that are just really entertaining, and it just blows your mind. Really great science fiction book, another page turner, like this one as well. Now, on to number 2. James Patterson and Brian Sitz, The Shadow. So this one was like a surprise find. I just happened to stumble upon it in the drugstore one night. Seen it on the paperback stand there, and I was thinking, The Shadow, is that what I think it is? Is that the Lamont Cranston Shadow? and read the back. Sure enough, it was, and I was thinking, James Patterson doing the Shadow. That's interesting. Now, James Patterson is a author I'm familiar with because I always see his books in, like, you go to the drugstore, you go to the grocery store, you look on the newsstand or in their book section. His books are always there, like Danielle Steele. You know who they are even if you've never read their books. So this is the first James Patterson book I read. So picked it up and didn't know what to expect, went in cold, and absolutely loved it. It was a blast, this book. This one was, I could not put it down, and just loved it. Now, I've always been a bit of a Shadow fan. You know, I used to listen to the radio show and stuff like that, and had some of the comics when I was a kid of the Shadow. And what I liked about this story was it stayed really faithful to the Shadow that's portrayed in the radio show, but puts like a unique spin on it. So it's a bit of a reinvention of the character, but not much. You know, it's updated a little bit. Now, that's always like bad news when you hear them update it for modern audiences. But I have to say, in this case, they do it really well, and it doesn't ruin the character of the Shadow and stays very faithful to the character of Lamont Cranston and Margot Lane. But fantastic read. Absolutely would recommend it. Love this book. So now on to number 1. So the number 1 book I read this year was Stephen King's Pet Sematary. And I just loved this book. I got so engrossed in this story. And it kind of surprised me. Stephen King is an author that I kind of avoided for a long time. The only other thing I read before this book was Cycle of the Werewolf. And just because he was so pushed, and it kind of annoyed me. I could never find the authors that I liked, like Bentley Little, in the horror section, because it would all be just Stephen King and Dean Koontz in the horror section whenever you would go to the bookstore. So that kind of annoyed me. But finally, you know, I was listening or watching some other book review channels, and they were talking about Stephen King, and one guy kind of sold me on the idea of reading Stephen King. He was such a fan, it was kind of infectious. So I decided to try one of his books, and I tried Pet Sematary because I was a fan of the 80s Pet Sematary horror movie and was a little bit familiar with the story. Now, I didn't think this was going to be such a page turner as it turned out to be, because I thought, well, I kind of know the story. I know roughly how it's going to end and things like that because of the movie. A lot of it's going to be spoiled. How good can it be? Boy, was I wrong. It was a fantastic book. And I found it just really fascinating, like the whole setting for the story and the lore of the Wendigo and the Micmac Indians, and how the burial ground was cursed, and all that lore behind it was very interesting, very fascinating. And it was like this constant build up throughout the story to this climax of evil at the end of it. It didn't feel like over the top like a lot of the other horror books I've read. Just a fantastic book, and completely sold me on Stephen King. So now I've bought some more Stephen King books. I want to read more of his stuff, and I always thought he was overhyped, but no way. When I read this book, he totally lives up to the hype. Fantastic author, just incredible. Absolutely loved this book. Easily, this was a no-brainer. As soon as I read this book, I said, I really think this is going to be the best book I've read all year. And it was awesome. Amazing book. So those are my top 5 books of 2022. And I look forward to reading some more great books this coming year. And hopefully my channel will still be around next year, and I can do another top 5 for 2023. So that's everything I got to say in this video. Let me know what you think in the comments section, and I will see you at the next one. I'd like to say thank you to all of my subscribers. I appreciate you all in helping this channel grow. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Also, don't forget to hit the bell icon so you'll be notified when new videos are uploaded.